Hi, I'm Paul Aston. Welcome to Tribal Jazzman Scholar Episode 2. We're going to talk about human history again, and I'm going to talk about just the last 200,000 years of our development, because that's when modern humans appeared. Someone that would pass the subway test. You know, you could clean them up, put them on a subway, and nobody would notice. If you go back a little further to earlier hominids in our human line, you have Homo erectus, Homo habilis. Homo erectus discovered fire. Homo habilis discovered stone tools, and that's quite a bit further back. And they wouldn't pass the subway test, even though they were fully upright and had large brains. Lived as hunters and gatherers, nomadic, predatory omnivores. The modern-looking humans have been around 200,000 years, and an important transition happened around 50, 60,000 years ago. We migrated out of Africa in a couple key events. We intermingled, by the way, DNA with Neanderthals. Just discovered that. Neanderthals had larger brains than us. They had descended from Homo erectus, who had traveled into Europe much earlier. So they're a separate human group that had already been established in those cold climates of Europe. And our DNA mixed with their DNA, and something happened. I don't know if it was the cause or not, but we began to express ourselves very differently as humans. We began to paint in caves and adorn our bodies and bury our dead in these elaborate graves, and clearly an expression of some kind of religious beliefs. And I'm imagining an early human out there in the wilderness, you know, rainbows and seasonal changes and the glory of stars and the miracle of life, the miracle of life. And I'm imagining that as an early human begins to create ideas of creative powers, of supernatural beings, that they're going to take on qualities that are human. So the anthropomorphizing of gods and goddesses. But if you look at humans, who creates life? It comes from the female. So it isn't a big stretch to imagine that those early humans began to venerate a female goddess. Maybe it was an earth goddess. What we do see is everywhere that these human populations migrated, they began not only to paint in caves and adorn their bodies and bury their dead, but they began to carve these figurines of women. And what did they exaggerate? What were the highlighted features of these figurines carved in bone and antler and stone? They were breasts, the nurturing abilities of women. They were pregnant, the life-giving powers of women. So these figurines that were carved the world over and have been discovered in the last 150 years probably represented that cultural idea that the life-giving powers of the universe come from a feminine deity. So we believe these were female goddess figurines. They could have had something to do with fertility, but clearly they're everywhere that we find human populations had migrated to. So we now know that from about 45,000 years ago up until the discovery of agriculture, that these nomadic, tribal, hunting-gathering humans had a rich, sophisticated culture centered around the idea of a female divine. Well, here we begin agriculture 12 to 14,000 years ago. We settle into villages, we domesticate crops and animals, cities begin to emerge, elaborate trade networks are established, art and iconography begin to fill these towns, and we've just been able to study these early towns by radiocarbon dating. We originally thought that these were sort of tentacle suburbs of Mesopotamia, because if you read a history social studies book even today, it still says Mesopotamia and Egypt were the first civilizations 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. But the same textbook will tell you that we discovered farming 12,000 to 14,000 years ago. So it begs the question, what happened for 8,000 years? We discover farming, we learn how to settle into villages, we build towns, we have trade networks, and yet that's not civilization. We have elaborate art and architecture, and yet civilization doesn't begin until 4,000 years ago with Mesopotamia and Egypt. The truth is that we now know that those were civilizations, but they didn't leave monumental architecture. They were pre-Bronze Age, they were pre-literate, no writing, don't have elaborate texts to figure out their myths and ideas, but we can study their art and their iconography and their architecture and the layouts of their towns, and we can learn a lot about them. Here's a couple things we know about these early civilizations, these sort of hidden, secret civilizations that we're now discovering. We know a few things about them. They didn't build walls around their cities, so they weren't at war with their neighbors. When you look at their art and iconography, you don't see these glorified battle scenes. You don't even see weapons. You don't find weapons. They were not engaged in warfare, so they didn't fortify their towns, no warfare. You look at their burials, their grave sites, and there's an equality. You don't see wealthy burials and poor burials. You don't see a differentiation in wealth. So they were egalitarian. You look at their art, and this is significant. You look at their iconography and you can get some idea what their religious beliefs were, and what it seems to be is that they venerated, again, a female goddess. So we see this 30,000 years of a kind of cultural continuity that never gets talked about. We don't really talk about the fact that early prehistoric peoples, those nomadic hunters and gatherers, not only had a rich culture, they painted elaborately in their caves, they had these intricate ritualized burials, body adornment, and these beautiful carved figurines of a female goddess carved in ivory, bone, and stone. Anywhere you find human populations during this last era of nomadic hunting and gathering, they appeared to venerate an earth goddess, a mother creatrix of all. And when they transitioned at 12 to 14,000 years ago into civilization, when they began to grow crops and domesticate animals and build cities, they apparently for 8,000 years lived without fortification. They had elaborate trade networks, but they weren't at war with their enemies. They had no weaponry, no glorification of battles, and their art and iconography show a continuity in the religious belief, a veneration of female goddesses, likely civilizations led by women. This is our legacy. And then we have this transition at 4,000 years ago when civilizations that created monumental architecture emerged. And they've attracted the attention of scholars and tourists, and we tend to think, if we look at our social studies books, that they were the first civilizations. These warring and enslaving populations who could build monumental temples and pyramids because they enslaved other human beings. This was the beginning of what I call patriarchy. It's the dominator social structure, to quote Rian Eisler. We left partnership and entered domination and a dominator approach. And it's the hallmarks of a dominator social structure have been incessant warfare, male leadership, male rulership, systems of inequality where there are wealthy and there are poor. And this social structure has existed now for 4,500 years, but it's an anomaly. We can see it as a detour in humanity. In a sense, we've kind of gone into a darkness so that as we recover an awareness of the light, of the goodness, of the potential, we might hold on to it a little more tenaciously, with a little more passion and fervor. And we're entering a new era, and that's the last thing I want to say here, is that as hard as it is to see, the last 150 years have seen dramatic changes in the treatment of people by other people. We've eliminated slavery on a legal level. It's still practiced in many parts of the world, but no government would dare to sanction slavery. We have given political voice to disenfranchised groups. We've given it to minorities. We've eliminated a poll tax. We've eliminated literacy tests. We've changed our conception of how to educate young people, how to raise our children. We've eliminated corporal punishment on a lot of levels. Not only political systems and educational systems, but our economic systems, our attitudes towards the environment are returning to a sense of stewardship and awe. We're at what Joanna Macy and David Korten and others call the Great Turning. We're at a unique moment in history. And it's a celebration of a much more ancient way of feeling and being towards each other and towards our earth. And it couldn't come a moment too soon. So as we study where we've come from, which helps us know who we are, and helps us to build a new story of where we're going, we can have a vision that's hopeful. And it's based in the facts. So I hope you'll join me again in Tribal Jazzman Scholar as we explore these ideas further. Thanks.